Thanks again for coming. I'd like to reiterate what I mentioned last time, how much we appreciate you guys being willing to be our connection to the community and get our word out when we have these incidents that are of high interest to town. So thanks for being here. What I'd like to accomplish today is discuss a little bit about the response to the reported shooting of one of our cars back on February 12th. And I will update you on the investigation and the status of that case and open it up for questions when we're done. So as you likely remember, about 9:45 a.m. on February 12th, one of our police officers reported over our number one channel that he had had his back window shattered out. He believed it was shot out by some type of a firearm. As you can imagine, any officers monitoring that channel 1 responded to the area to help. It occurred right at the corner of Pine and Woody, just right across the parking lot from our downtown station. So those of us in the station also heard that and went out to help our officer. Captain Odlin, Assistant Chief Hoffman, Sergeant Welsh, and I all went out to help him and see what we could figure out was going on. What I noticed right away was that the officer who reported being shot upon had his car angled off to the side, kind of facing to the northeast, while he was in that 400 block of Woody. There are several other officers around in that area who had taken positions of cover and concealment and were scanning for a threat in the area. They handed off a male to me, who we later determined to be one of the main witnesses. Before I was removed him to City Hall to have him interviewed, I noticed that the officer's back window was shattered out. There was a hole in it, several inches in diameter, and we just ordered those officers to stay in that position, to be buddied up so that they had good 360-degree coverage, and essentially just locked down the area. We locked down the area for a couple of reasons: to contain a suspect that might be in the immediate vicinity, and to keep other uninvolved innocent third parties from coming to that area where they could be exposed to some threat. So I brought that male back. We handed him off to an investigator to be interviewed. His immediate statement was that he was directly across the street from the police officer. He heard a pop. He heard the window crash out, and he saw the officer pull over and jump out of his car. He asked the officer, "Are you okay? Somebody's shooting at you." And our officer agreed that that was his perception. And so then we handed him off for a further detailed interview. He also told us the other occupant in his car made the same observations, that they heard a pop and that they heard the glass break out, and then we furthered the interview from that point. So what I knew at that point was we had an experienced, well-trained police officer who clearly perceived that he had been shot upon. Like I said, the way he positioned his car, he immediately jumped out of the car, armed himself with a rifle, and started looking for a threat. He told me that he was just shocked that when he looked up, he didn't identify a threat. He was convinced that there'd be somebody there with a firearm confronting him. So, that carries a lot of credibility with me, is his account. What corroborated that account was the two people in the car right across the street who had the exact same perception. So then I thought about where we're at here. We're in a downtown urban setting, which has open government buildings, has private businesses that are open, residences, has people right next to a major public transportation center. It was a mild winter day where we had people out walking around. The other thing I consider is that we had a suspect that was unaccounted for. We didn't know where this person was. We didn't know what this person was armed with, or what type of skill, what kind of training that they had. So to me, as far as assessing a public safety threat, it just seemed to be extraordinarily high. So there was two things that I could immediately control. Number one was secure City Hall, which I did. We ordered a lockdown of the entire facility. And number two is to activate our tactical team. Both of those decisions, and every decision downstream from that, were made first and foremost for public safety. We really have an obligation to everybody in that area to do whatever we can to ensure their safety and mitigate any pending harm. Also have an obligation to our officers. For me to deploy officers that do not have the advanced training and personal protective equipment to address this situation is really inappropriate. We have a tactical team that's trained and equipped for this kind of thing. And that's the team that's the appropriate response for this type of threat. So that deployment of that team was ordered. They did their work, which was an open air search, a door-to-door search, identifying people who could be potential witnesses or suspects and getting them in contact with the investigators. After that was done and the scene was secure, we transitioned into that investigative phase. We learned a number of things that day. Later that day, we used metal detector right at the scene there to identify if there was any shrapnel from a firearm, fragments from a firearm left at the scene. Then we brought the car in to have it examined over the next, that day and the next day largely. We looked at a number of things in that investigation. The glass itself, trying to determine if it was an impact or some type of manufacturer defect, and it's been largely inconclusive. The shards of that glass, can represent in a couple of different ways. Number one, either if it was a defect or if it was an impact, and there's no definitive answer to examining that glass. The other thing is we x-rayed that car twice, looking for bullet fragments, and we've not located any fragments in the back seat of that car. Visually examined it to see if there was a projectile that went in and bounced off something inside the car, and haven't located that either. Some of the other stuff that we've done is consulted with experts at the crime lab. We have through our local FBI agent, we consulted with expert at their lab. They said it's possible to have a ricochet, 100% ricochet off of glass and not leave something inside, but they thought it more times than not it would leave something inside. We also talked to glass experts who are just in that industry, auto glass, and they said it's possible that you do have these type of manufacturer defects that pop and shatter in place, leaving a void, which is similar to what we saw from our in our car that day. So at the end of the day, we have corroboration in both theories, right? We have corroboration to what we initially believed to be somebody shot at our car with something. And we have corroboration to the fact that it could be a manufacturer's defect with that glass. There's not any, the car was about 5 to 6 years old. It was a moderate day temperature-wise, so we don't have a lot of extremes like a brand new product out there in a really hot or really cold day. So there's a fair amount of unknowns. I'm sorry to leave it at that with you guys, that we don't have a lot of answers as to what caused it, but I wanted to give you an update as to where we're at. There was the other agencies that helped us here that day I really appreciated the Sheriff's Office and the University Police. So we were so busy wrapped up in the incident, we didn't have time to put out the information. We rely on Sergeant Welsh to do that. He's right there helping us, getting this witness brought in and arranged for an interview and so on. So Chief Ludeman at the university immediately recognized the nexus to his campus community, which is the public transportation center there. And he understands his responsibilities on Clery Act, and for him to put two and two together and get that timely notice out was helpful to us because it informed the community when we didn't have the time to do it. Same with the Sheriff's Office through their PIO efforts were able to give information out. So I just wanted to make sure that people didn't read anything more into that. Other than that, we were just too busy at the moment to do that. So we appreciated our partners getting that out for us. So, is there any questions that I can answer?
So where does this leave your team, your all's morale? How is everybody there feeling about this? Nervous or not?
Yeah, certainly aware, right? I mean, police officers always need situational awareness, whether this happens or not, and be aware that this type of thing can happen at any time. Certainly, immediately that day and immediately after that day, there's quite a bit of heightened awareness. But now I think people are starting to settle down and realize we don't have answers that really prove that somebody was shooting at us that day. It's certainly on their radar, so to speak, and they're well aware of it. But like I said, they have good situational awareness before this anyway.
You used the word pop a couple of times. Is pop the same thing as a report? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, like a rifle. Yeah, coming from a firearm. One of the witnesses, ironically, told us, "I've been shot at," and she says, "I know what it sounds like to be shot at," and that was a gunshot. So take that for what it's worth. And we asked specifically that question of,
When you say pop, are you talking about the sound of the glass, or are you talking about a pop and then the breakage of the glass? And without fail, they reported back, no, we heard a pop and then the breakage of the glass.
Are you guys still actively investigating this?
Yeah, it's still signed. It's still active. So that leads me to a good point, is that if anybody knows anything that hasn't reached out to us yet, please do so. You can call our non-emergency number. We'll connect you with the lead investigator.
The officer involved, is he back on duty?
He's back on duty, yes.
Is he okay?
Yes.
Are you going to release his name?
I'm not going to, no. We haven't ruled out that this is a crime, and that would make him the victim of a crime, and so it's appropriate for us to not identify him.
Last week, Travis was saying that when you guys were grabbing video equipment from the area, that you saw people in the area walking around. Have you interviewed more people who are walking in the street that just could be out and about in downtown Missoula?
Yeah, we've identified all the people that we had seen on that video and taken statements from them. There's a wide variety of information that came from those statements. Some much like what we heard before, others who didn't have anything to add. They didn't realize that this had occurred. So,
if there is a suspect involved that was responsible for whatever caused that damage to the back of the car, since it's already been like 2 weeks, would that make you guys' job difficult to track them down and put them into custody with that much time that's gone by?
it's not unusual that there's a time delay before we identify suspects, but yeah, I mean, obviously, I guess that the passage of time is a little bit of a challenge, but we can overcome that if we get the right information about who's responsible.
The response that occurred with so many officers up on roofs, snipers, prepared for whatever might be there. Do you feel I'm asking this for so many people have asked me, do you feel that's an appropriate response in a situation like this where no one was really injured?
Without a doubt. So the factors that I talked about earlier about how I evaluated the information I knew at the time and the potential risk to that, I think it's entirely appropriate to respond proactively like that. It is all about ensuring safety at that point. Like I said, the safety first and foremost of any uninvolved third party in the area. The safety of our officers, to have the right people there with the right training and equipment to handle that mission, and ultimately the safety of the suspect if and when the suspect is located. A tactical team like that can control a situation much better than a uniformed patrol officer or detective or whoever happens to come across the person relatively unplanned, and that enhances safety.
Was that team under a unified command?
Yes. The tactical team is responsible to the tactical operations commander, and they brief, they make a plan to secure the area, and they carry that out and report that back to the command post. The decision to make that call early, to me, is you weigh the positives and the negatives. So making that decision early and getting those wheels in motion to get a team on, activated sooner than later, to me is important, because if no suspect is located, what's the downside? There are some people inconvenienced. I understand that. There's some people that don't appreciate the optics of that. I understand that. But at the end of the day, that's really the downside of deploying a team like that and nobody's found. Conversely, the downside of not activating a team, and if there's a person at a position of advantage with a firearm, you just run the risk of having a tragedy there. So I erred on the side of public safety. I erred on the side of us getting in front of this as quickly as we could and controlling the situation the best we could. And that team is the best team to do it.
Can you reiterate more clearly why Sergeant Walsh was unable to communicate with the media?
Yeah, because we needed him. He was helping coordinate witnesses, coordinating detectives to interview them. We have to assign people to stay with a witness until there's somebody with them, so that they're not unsecured in our building. He helped communicate with the command post, and ultimately the city's PIO needed him, and we can break him off and do that later. But nothing is as important as stabilizing the scene at that time, and that's not to disrespect the media's role or disrespect the community's desire to have information, but we just couldn't couldn't do it all at once, and so we prioritized him to help us on those emergent needs.
Would you be able to explain more in depth this other possibility that happened if it wasn't someone who shot or threw some projectile in the window, the possibility that there was some sort of defect with the vehicle and exactly what would have happened if that was the case?
Yeah, so, I mean, when we talk to glass experts, if you just read about it on the internet and all that, this stuff happens. Matter of fact, I had a friend from another state that reported it happened to his vehicle last week. So I don't understand the phenomenon about what causes it. What we did to assess it, like I said, we examined the glass particles. We examined the defrost system, and it was functional, working fine. We examined the fuse for that. It was intact and working fine. Talked to experts about auto body and asked, could there have been a flex in the frame of that vehicle as it went into a pothole or over a snowbank or something that would cause that? He said, no, frames don't flex like that. So we rely on experts about what causes that, and at the end of the day, it's kind of unexplainable, at least by me, as to what that's all about. But it's not unheard of for glass to fail like that kind of unexpectedly. So it's one of the things we have to consider as a potential cause.
Are the glass windows in the patrol cars standard windows?
Yes.
Car windows?
Yeah.
For your friend who had just mentioned that's in another city that saw a similar issue, do you know if, visually with the size of the hole, if that was similar to their situations or other malfunctions that have been reported for other departments?
Yeah, I don't know that from him, but I do know from a glass expert, he described he has seen circumstances that are consistent with what our patrol vehicle looked like, which was the shattered window with a clear void in the middle, a through and through hole in the middle area.
I'm sorry to keep going back to the pop, but if your investigators consider the possibility of a suppressor or B, an air rifle or something like that?
All of the above, yeah. I mean, there's all options are on the table about what occurred. It could even have been, I guess potentially a pellet gun, BB gun, airsoft, any type of projectile like that.
Gotta be frustrating.
Very, yeah. I really wish we could give everybody some more answers about what occurred. Most importantly, nobody's harmed. That's the number one thing. And secondly, just giving people some information and an update as to where we're at.
Should you find a suspect that you can prove was responsible for this, what would the charges be potentially?
Well, charging documents are always open to the county attorney's office. To me, it sounds like attempted deliberate homicide. If somebody's shooting a police officer with a high-powered rifle, that's where I'd want to start.
Was the officer on leave at all?
He did get a couple of days off. It was a stressful day for him, and he's regrouped and back to work.
Is MPD still the lead investigating agency?
Yes.
Who else is assisting?
We don't have any agencies working with us on the follow-up investigation. Of course, all the area agencies helped us that day with a number of things, but right now it's assigned to an investigator for our department.
I know you had mentioned you identified anybody who you could see in camera footage, and if that wasn't the suspect at this point, is there a possibility that they were not on the ground, that they were maybe, in a building or up above from that patrol car?
Yeah, there's always that possibility. So we focused our area of search all to the south and kind of southwest because that logically is where that would have come from since the car was facing north, and of course didn't find anybody in any of those buildings or any of those elevated positions. If there's no other questions, last thing I wanted to just close with was how much we appreciate the support on this. So downtown businesses and organizations, people just stopping me and talking to me on the street and thanking me for the response and how we handled the situation. And we appreciate that as an organization for everybody who's reached out to us. Thank you.
Thank you.